Midnight patrol dead quiet. Rain slicked the permacrete, turning the neon bleed from the noodle stalls into a greasy watercolor. Jax pulled the collar of his worn synth leather jacket higher. The air tasted of ozone, synth oil, and piss. Home. He moved through the alleyways of Sector 9 like a ghost, his heavy boots making no sound on the wet ground. This was his rhythm. A circuit he walked every night, checking the dead zones, making sure the rot stayed where it was. A flicker of movement in the cul-de-sac ahead. Too fast for a scavenger drone. Too fluid for a stimhead. Jax flattened himself against the corroded wall of a shipping container, the cold metal seeping through his jacket. He drew the heavy-caliber pistol from its thigh holster. The weapon was an extension of his arm, cold and familiar. Voices cut through the downpour. Harsh, guttural. Corporate enforcement dialect. The worst kind of trash. Secure the asset. Commander wants it alive, but damaged is acceptable. Jax peered around the edge of the container. 3 of them. Black armor, pulse carbines held at the low ready. They formed a triangle, closing in on something huddled against a rusted delivery truck. It was a woman, or something like one. Her clothes were torn, soaked through. Long hair, the color of spun moonlight, clung to her face and shoulders. Even from this distance, he could see she was hurt. A dark stain spread across her side, the rain thinning it to a purplish sheen on the pavement. Not red. His eyes narrowed. She pushed herself up, one hand braced against the truck's fender. Her other hand held a wicked-looking blade, curved and serrated. It shimmered with a faint energy. She was cornered, outnumbered, but she wasn't broken. Her stance was a coiled spring of defiance. Her head lifted, and in the flickering light of a busted street lamp, he saw her eyes. They glowed with a faint, internal luminescence. Pale violet. Furious. "Get back," she snarled, her voice a low, dangerous hum. The lead enforcer laughed, a grating sound through his helmet's vocabulator. "The little royal has claws. Stand down. There's nowhere left to run." She didn't answer with words. She lunged, a blur of silver hair and dark steel. She was impossibly fast, even injured. Her blade sliced through the air, and one of the enforcers screamed as the energy edge bit into the armor at his shoulder joint. Sparks flew. He staggered back, but his partner was already moving, slamming the butt of his carbine into her wounded side. A sharp cry of pain escaped her lips, tight and controlled. She stumbled, her guard dropping for a fraction of a second. It was all they needed. The third enforcer raised his weapon. Jax moved. He didn't think. He just reacted. The instinct that had kept him alive through 3 off-world tours screamed at him. His pistol was up, sight picture acquired. A single, deafening crack echoed in the narrow alley. The enforcer aiming at her jerked, a neat, black hole appearing in the center of his helmet's faceplate. He dropped like a sack of stones. The other 2 spun around, weapons sweeping the darkness. "Contact," one shouted. Too late. Jax was already in motion, a shadow detaching from the shadows. He closed the distance in 3 long strides, his fist connecting with the throat of the enforcer who had struck the woman. The crunch of synth cartilage was sickeningly loud. The man gargled, dropping his carbine and clawing at his neck. Jax didn't give him a chance to recover. He ripped the carbine from the third man's grasp, the one she had wounded, and slammed the weapon's stock into the side of his helmet. The helmet cracked. The man went down. Silence returned to the alley, broken only by the drumming of the rain and the gurgling of the dying enforcer. Jax stood over the bodies, his own breath misting in the cold air. He let the borrowed carbine clatter to the ground. The fight had lasted less than 10 seconds. Brutal. Efficient. Final. He turned his attention to the woman. She was back on her feet, blade held defensively, pointed directly at his chest. Her violet eyes were narrowed slits of suspicion. Her chest rose and fell in ragged breaths. "I didn't need your help," she hissed. Jax looked from her pale, strained face to the spreading dark stain at her side. "You're losing blood." His voice was rough from disuse. "It is none of your concern." She took a half-step back, her stance unwavering despite the tremor running through her body. He could see the pain etched around her eyes, the tight clench of her jaw. Pride and agony warring for control. "They'll send more," he stated, a simple fact. "I will deal with them." "Not like that, you won't." He gestured with his chin toward her wound. "You'll bleed out in an hour." Her lips thinned into a bloodless line. She swayed, her glowing eyes flickering for a moment. Defiance was the only thing holding her upright. Jax holstered his pistol. He took a slow step forward, hands held open and away from his body. A gesture of peace. Her blade tracked his every move. Stay back, human. The word was an insult. He ignored it. You need a place to ground. You need that wound sealed. I need nothing from you. He saw the moment her strength gave out. Her knees buckled. The energy blade sputtered and died, the weapon falling from her numb fingers and clattering on the wet permacrete. She crumpled. Jax closed the distance in a single stride, catching her before she hit the ground. She was lighter than he expected, but dense, all wire and muscle under the soaked fabric. A groan of protest and pain rumbled in her chest. Her eyes fluttered open, locking with his. Fury still burned there, but it was banked now, overshadowed by sheer exhaustion. Don't touch me, she managed, her voice a bare whisper. A little late for that, Jax said, his tone flat. He adjusted his grip, sliding one arm under her knees and the other behind her back, lifting her into his arms. She was cold, shivering. She tried to struggle, a pathetic, weak push against his chest. Put me down. No. He turned his back on the carnage, on the bodies the reclamation drones would scrub before morning, and started moving. He knew these alleys better than he knew his own face. The labyrinth of steel and shadows was his domain. She fell silent, conserving what little energy she had left. Her head eventually lolled against his shoulder, a reluctant surrender. He could feel the unnatural heat of a fever starting to build in her. The wound was bad, worse than he thought. He moved faster, his steps sure and silent through the rain-lashed night. His sanctuary was close, a forgotten sublevel maintenance hub, reinforced and repurposed. His lair. The heavy steel door hissed open at his approach, recognizing his biosignature. It slammed shut behind them, the sound echoing in the sudden, sterile silence. The outside world vanished. The air inside was dry, smelling of clean solvent and hot metal. It was a single, large room. A Spartan cot in one corner. A workbench covered in disassembled electronics and weapon parts in another. Racks of sealed rations lined one wall. A medical station, gleaming under a harsh utility light, occupied the far end. Functional, fortified, devoid of comfort. He carried her to the medical station and carefully laid her on the narrow examination bed. She was barely conscious now, her breathing shallow. The front of her dark tunic was saturated with the purplish-blue blood. He grabbed a pair of trauma shears from a tray. I have to cut this away, he said, not expecting an answer. Her eyes cracked open, a sliver of violet glow. She gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod. Permission. The shears made quick work of the tough fabric, splitting the tunic open. He pulled the wet material aside, exposing the wound. It was a deep puncture, ragged and angry, just below her ribs. The tissue around it was already showing signs of a nasty infection. Pulse carbines fired superheated plasma bolts. It was a cauterizing wound, but it cooked the flesh it touched. He got to work. His movements were practiced, efficient. He cleaned the wound with antiseptic, his touch impersonal and clinical. She hissed in pain, her body tensing on the bed, but she didn't cry out. Her fingers curled into tight fists at her sides. He injected a broad-spectrum antibiotic and a powerful painkiller directly into the muscle of her arm. He washed her face, saw the lines of pain soften slightly as the drug took hold. Her physiology was different, but pain was a universal language. Next came the dermal regenerator. He calibrated the device, the low hum filling the quiet room. He pressed the emitter head against the edges of the wound. A soft blue light pulsed as the machine began knitting the damaged flesh back together, layer by layer. It was a slow process. He focused on the task, blocking out everything else. The woman on his table, the bodies in the alley, the questions that hung in the air between them. When the regenerator beeped, signaling completion, he pulled it away. A thin, pink scar was all that remained of the life-threatening injury. It would fade in a day or two. Her breathing was deeper now, more even. The fever had already started to break. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time without the urgency of combat or medicine. Her features were sharp, aristocratic. High cheekbones, a straight nose, a stubborn set to her jaw even in unconsciousness. Her ears had a subtle, graceful point at the tips. Her skin was pale, almost translucent. A warrior. A royal, the enforcer had said. He pulled a clean, thermal blanket from a storage locker and draped it over her. Her clothes were soaked and ruined. He couldn't leave her in them. With the same detached efficiency, he stripped away the tattered, wet garments. He worked quickly, avoiding lingering on the lean, corded muscle of her frame or the intricate, swirling patterns of silvery scars that crisscrossed her back and arms. Old wounds. A life of battle. He found a plain gray tunic and shorts from his own meager supply and dressed her in them. They were too big, hanging loosely on her frame, but they were dry and clean. He disposed of her ruined clothes in the incinerator chute. Job done. He stepped back, suddenly unsure what to do next. He wasn't used to having another person in his space, especially not one who looked like her. He went to his workbench and began methodically cleaning his pistol, the familiar ritual of comfort. Strip, clean, oil, reassemble. The rhythmic clicks of metal on metal were the only sounds. Hours passed. He kept watch. She didn't stir. He eventually moved to the small cot, sitting on the edge, his back to her. He didn't sleep. He just waited. The first gray light of the perpetual twilight of Sector 9 was filtering through the armored slit of the viewport when he heard her move. A rustle of the blanket. A soft intake of breath. He turned his head slowly. She was sitting up, pushing the blanket away. Her violet eyes were clear, alert, and fixed on him. They held no gratitude, only suspicion. Where am I? Her voice was stronger now, a low alto that resonated in the quiet room. My home. She looked around, taking in the Spartan, functional space. Her gaze lingered on the weapon racks, then on the heavy, sealed door. A cage. A sanctuary, he corrected. It's safe here. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, her movements stiff. She looked down at the gray clothes she wore, then at the faint pink line on her side where the wound had been. Her hand went to it, fingers tracing the new scar. You healed me. It was a statement, not a question, laced with disbelief. I stopped the bleeding, he said. You did more than that. Her eyes lifted to his again, sharp and probing. Why? It was the question he'd been expecting, the one he didn't have a good answer for. They were corporate thugs. I don't like them. It was a piss-poor reason, and they both knew it. She didn't buy it for a second. People in this sector don't get involved. They look the other way. It's how they survive. I'm not most people. I can see that, she said, her tone dry. What do you want from me? Nothing. A flicker of something that might have been surprise crossed her face. Everyone wants something. When you're healed, you can leave, he said, turning back to his workbench. He picked up a power cell, pretending to inspect it. I am healed now. You're weak. You need food. Rest. I am not weak, she snapped, the fire returning to her voice. She stood up to prove her point, and immediately swayed, her hand shooting out to grip the edge of the medbed for support. A curse left her lips, low and guttural, in a language he didn't understand. Sit down, he said, his voice flat, not looking at her. He heard a sharp sigh of frustration, but Saturday, he prepared a ration pack, the nutrient paste bland but effective. He heated it and brought it to her with a canteen of water. She stared at the bowl he offered as if it might be poisoned. Eat. Hesitantly, she took it. She ate slowly at first, then with a hunger that betrayed how long it had been since her last meal. They existed in a tense silence. He watched her from the corner of his eye. She assessed him with open scrutiny. It was a standoff, a fragile, unspoken truce in a concrete box. What is your name? She asked, her voice softer now, the food having taken the edge off her hostility. Jax. She nodded slowly. I am Lyra. She said it simply, but the name carried weight. The weight of a title, of a lineage. Lyra, he repeated. The name felt strange in his mouth. Foreign. The silence stretched again. He was used to silence. He preferred it. But this was different. It was heavy, filled with unspoken questions and the palpable presence of another person. A very dangerous person. The next 2 days passed in the same tense pattern. He would provide her with food. She would eat it in silence. Her strength returned quickly. Her alien physiology was remarkably resilient. She began to pace the confines of the room, a caged predator testing the bars of her enclosure. Her movements were fluid and graceful, a dancer's poise with a warrior's deadly intent. She never turned her back on him completely. He did her the same courtesy. The trust between them could have fit on the head of a pin. Why are they hunting you? He asked on the third day, breaking the long silence. She stopped her pacing and turned to face him, her expression unreadable. It is a political matter. Looked personal to me. My politics are personal, she countered. They knew who you were. They called you royal. A shadow passed over her face. They were mistaken. A clear lie. He didn't push it. Late that night, the proximity alert on his security console chimed. A soft, insistent beep that cut through the low hum of the air recyclers. Jax was on his feet in an instant, his pistol in his hand. Lyra was already standing, her body tensed, her eyes fixed on the door. She had no weapon, but she looked no less dangerous for it. Company, he said, his voice low. He moved to the console, his fingers flying over the holographic display. 3 external cameras showed the alley outside. 5 figures this time. More enforcers. Better armed. One of them held a scanner, sweeping the area. It beeped, its light lingering on the steel door of his home. They had found her. Or at least, her trail. They know, Lyra whispered, her voice tight. They know I'm here. A heavy pounding echoed from the door. Metal on metal. Open up. Consortium enforcement. We have a warrant to search this domicile for a fugitive asset. The voice was amplified, distorted by a helmet speaker. Jax looked at Lyra. Her face was a mask of grim resolve. She was preparing for a fight to the death. Here, in his home, he had a choice. Open the door and hand her over. End this. Go back to his quiet, empty life. Or he could lie. He could make her problem his problem. The pounding came again, louder this time. Comply now, or we will breach. Jax made his decision. He keyed the intercom. What do you want? He asked, his voice deliberately rough and annoyed, like he'd just been woken up. We're tracking a fugitive. Biometric trail ends at your location. We need to come inside. I haven't seen anyone. Jax lied, his voice flat and steady. Just me here. He glanced at Lyra. Her eyes were wide, a flicker of shock in their violet depths. She had expected him to betray her. The scanner says otherwise. Open the door. Last warning. Jax knew the door wouldn't hold against a dedicated breach. Not for long. He had to sell the lie. He hit a switch on his console, and the heavy armored shutter over the viewport slid open with a grinding sound. It was a small opening, just big enough for them to see in and for him to see out. Look for yourself, he said into the intercom. It's just me. Now get the hell off my property before you scare away the paying customers. He gestured vaguely around the empty room, playing the part of a disgruntled local running some shady business. The lead enforcer stepped up to the viewport, his helmet's optical sensors glowing red. He peered inside. Jax stood his ground, letting the man look. He had positioned himself to block the view of the medical station where Lyra now hid, crouched low and out of sight. It was a gamble, a huge one. The enforcer stared for a long, tense moment. Jax met the blank, red gaze of the helmet without flinching. Scanner must be malfunctioning from the storm. The enforcer's voice crackled over the external speaker. Interference from the substations. He turned to his team. False reading. Let's move. Check the next sector. Jax watched them go, their forms disappearing into the rain and gloom. He didn't move until their heat signatures vanished from his sensors. Only then did he close the shutter. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He turned around. Lyra was standing now, watching him. Her expression was one he hadn't seen before. The hard mask of suspicion was gone, replaced by something else. Confusion. Vulnerability. You lied for me, she said, her voice barely a whisper. You made yourself a target. What? I told you, he said, his voice gruff as he turned away, unable to hold her gaze. I don't like them. He started cleaning a weapon that was already clean, needing something to do with his hands. That is not a reason to risk your life for a stranger. Maybe I was bored, he muttered. He heard her take a step closer. No, she said, her voice soft but certain. That's not it. He finally looked at her. She was standing just a few feet away, her arms crossed over her chest. The oversized gray tunic made her look small, but her presence filled the room. They hunt me because I am Lyra Valerius, she said, her voice gaining strength, the royal cadence returning. First daughter of the house of Valerius, heir to the cerulean throne. So the enforcer was right. She was royalty. And the consortium wants your throne, he guessed. A bitter smile touched her lips. The consortium wants the resources my throne controls. The hyperlane access. The Prometheum mines. They backed a coup. Led by whom? Her expression hardened, a flash of pain in her violet eyes. My sister. The word was heavy with betrayal. Serafina. She made a deal with them. My life in exchange for our people's freedom. Or so she claims. So it was personal. A family affair, played out on a galactic stage. And he was now standing right in the middle of it. You just painted a target on your own back, Jax, she said quietly. They will not forget this. They will be back. Let them come, he said. And for the first time since he'd locked himself away from the universe, he felt something other than numb indifference. A spark. A purpose. Protecting her. The dynamic in the bunker shifted after that night. The tense truce gave way to a fragile alliance. The silence was no longer a standoff, but a shared quiet. They spoke more. She told him of her world, a place of soaring crystal spires and twin suns. He listened, saying little of his own past, but absorbing every detail of hers. One night, he was startled awake by a sound. A choked cry. He sat up on his cot, his hand instinctively going for his weapon. The sound came again. From her. She was on the med bed, thrashing in her sleep, caught in the grip of a nightmare. Her hands were clenched, her face contorted in anguish. No, Serafina, don't, she whimpered. Jax got up and moved to her side. He hesitated for a moment, then reached out and gently touched her shoulder. Lyra. Her eyes flew open. They were wide with terror, unfocused. She flinched away from his touch, scrambling back on the bed until she hit the wall. She was breathing hard, a panicked, cornered animal. Hey, he said, keeping his voice low and calm. It's me. Jax. You're safe. He slowly raised his hands to show they were empty. Recognition dawned in her eyes, chasing the fear away. The panic subsided, replaced by a deep, shuddering breath. A dream, she whispered, her voice hoarse. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the warmth of the bunker. It felt real. He sat on the edge of the bed, a respectful distance away. I know the feeling. She looked at him, her gaze searching his face in the dim light. You have them too? He just nodded, his own ghost stirring in the shadows of his mind. The screams from Tartarus V, the smell of burning metal and flesh. The faces of the men he'd lost. He unconsciously touched the jagged scar that ran from his temple down his cheek, a permanent reminder of his last mission. Her eyes followed the movement. How did you get that? She asked softly. Souvenir from my last job, he said, his voice tight. I was a soldier. Special forces. We were sent to quell an uprising on a mining colony. Turned out the uprising was funded by the same people who signed our paychecks. A corporate war. For profit. They set us up. Wrote us off. I was the only one who walked away. He didn't know why he was telling her this. He hadn't spoken of it to anyone. Ever. But looking at her, seeing the reflection of his own trauma in her eyes, the words just came. She was silent for a long moment. Then, she reached out, her fingers hesitating just inches from his face. May I? He didn't move. He just nodded. Her touch was surprisingly gentle as her fingertips traced the line of the scar. A strange current passed between them, a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with weapons or technology. It was raw, primal. He could feel the calluses on her fingers, the touch of a warrior, not a pampered princess. Her eyes held his, and the space between them suddenly felt charged, dense with unspoken things. The air grew thick. His heart started to pound a heavy, unfamiliar rhythm against his ribs. He could see the pulse beating in the delicate skin of her throat. Her scent, something like night-blooming flowers and ozone, filled his senses. You think I don't see it? She whispered, her fingers still tracing the scar on his cheek. Her voice was a low thrum that vibrated through him. See what? He managed his own voice rough. The way you watch me when you think I'm not looking. His jaw tightened. She wasn't wrong. You look at me like I'm a puzzle you need to solve, she continued, her thumb brushing against his lower lip. Or a threat you need to neutralize. You're both, he admitted, his voice barely a rasp. A small, dangerous smile played on her lips. And what do you see? Trouble. You're not afraid of trouble, Jax. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. An accusation. A challenge. No, he said, his voice dropping lower. I'm not. He closed the small distance between them. His hand came up to cup the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her silver hair. Her skin was warm, alive. Her breath hitched. For a heartbeat, they were frozen, balanced on a knife's edge. Suspicion warring with a desperate, undeniable pull. Then she leaned in, breaking the tension. Her lips met his. It wasn't a soft kiss. It was a collision, a clash of wills. It was fierce, demanding, a release of all the pent-up fear and tension and anger that had been simmering between them since the moment they met. Her hands came up to grip his shoulders, her nails digging into the fabric of his shirt. He pulled her closer, deepening the kiss, his other arm wrapping around her waist, lifting her against him. It was a battle for dominance that neither of them wanted to win. A surrender. He broke the kiss, his forehead resting against hers, both of them breathing hard. Her violet eyes were dark, molten. "I don't do this," he said, the words feeling stupid and inadequate. "I don't get involved." "It seems you already are," she whispered, her lips brushing against his again. That was all it took. The last thread of his control snapped. He swept her into his arms and carried her the few steps to his cot, laying her down on the rough blanket. He followed her down, his body covering hers, trapping her, claiming her. Their clothes became an obstacle, a barrier to be torn away. Buttons popped, fabric ripped. It was frantic, needy. Skin met skin. Her body was a landscape of lean muscle and silvery scars, a testament to a life of conflict. His was a roadmap of his own wars, hard and unyielding. They fit together like two broken pieces of the same weapon. Their union was not gentle. It was a storm, a desperate, frenzied claiming, a fight and a fusion all at once. It was the raw, unfiltered language of two people who had only ever known survival, finding a different kind of battlefield in each other's arms. In the aftermath, they lay tangled together in the narrow cot, the silence of the bunker pressing in on them. The air was still charged, thick with the scent of their encounter. Lyra lay with her head on his chest, her silver hair fanned out across his skin. He could feel the steady beat of her heart against his ribs. It was a foreign sensation, comforting, terrifying. He stared up at the metal ceiling, his mind reeling. He had let her in, past the walls, past the armor, into the one place he had sworn to keep empty. "Jax," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. "Yeah." She lifted her head to look at him, her violet eyes searching his. "This changes nothing." "It changes everything," he contradicted, his voice quiet but firm. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. "We are still hunted. I am still a fugitive. You are still a hermit hiding from the world." "You're not a fugitive anymore," he said. "You're a queen fighting for her throne. And I'm not hiding." He paused. "Not anymore." Before she could respond, the world exploded. A deafening blast ripped through the bunker, throwing them from the cot. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. Red emergency strobes kicked in, casting the room in a bloody, pulsing light. Alarms blared, a chorus of synthetic screams. "They're back," Lyra yelled over the din, already scrambling for cover. And they brought bigger toys. Jax was already moving, pulling on his pants, grabbing his pistol from the floor. The main door, the one he had thought impenetrable, was buckling inward, glowing cherry red in the center. They were cutting through it. "They're not getting in that way for a few more minutes," he shouted, his mind racing. "But they'll have the place surrounded." Another explosion rocked the bunker, this one from the far wall. Concrete and steel shrieked. Dust and debris filled the air. A gaping hole was torn in the wall, leading to the service tunnels beyond. A new exit, and a new entrance for them. "We have to go," Lyra said, pulling on the torn tunic. "Now, gear up," he ordered, throwing her a spare ammo belt and a compact submachine gun from a hidden weapons locker. She caught it with an expert's familiarity, checking the charge and racking the slide in one smooth motion. His sanctuary was gone. His quiet life was shattered. He looked around at the wreckage of his home, the only place he had felt safe for years. He felt a pang of loss, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, hard resolve. It was just a place, a cage. He looked at Lyra, her face grim and determined in the flashing red light, a weapon in her hands. She was real. She was what mattered now. "This way," he said, grabbing a go-bag filled with medkits, rations, and power cells. "I know these tunnels." They plunged into the darkness of the service corridor just as the main door finally gave way with a groaning screech of tortured metal. The sounds of pulse rifle fire and shouted orders echoed behind them. They ran. The tunnels were a maze of pipes and conduits, dripping with stagnant water and smelling of decay. Jax led the way, his light cutting a narrow path through the oppressive dark. Lyra moved behind him, her steps silent, her weapon ready. They were a unit, instinctively covering each other's backs. "They will have schematics," she said, her voice tight as they navigated a treacherous junction. "They will know the main routes." "We're not taking the main routes," Jax replied, pulling open a rusted maintenance grate that was hidden behind a cluster of pipes. "This way leads to the old aqueduct system. It's not on any official city plan." They crawled through the narrow opening into a much larger tunnel. The air was thick with the smell of moss and running water. They could finally stand upright. They moved in silence for what felt like hours, the only sounds the dripping of water and the distant, echoing hum of the city above. They finally found a dry, defensible alcove to rest. Jax took the first watch while Lyra cleaned their weapons and took stock of their meager supplies. "This is my fault," she said quietly, her back to him. "They destroyed your home because of me." "It was a box," he said, his eyes scanning the darkness. "I needed to get out of it anyway." She turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. "My sister, Seraphina, she was always the ambitious one," she began, her voice low and laced with a deep, old pain. "I was the warrior, the shield of the throne. She was the politician, the voice. I never thought she would be capable of such a betrayal." "Power corrupts," Jax said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "It wasn't just power," Lyra continued, shaking her head. "It was fear. Our people were facing a plague, a blight on our crops. The consortium offered a cure, a synthetic agent that could restore our harvests. The price was our sovereignty, our allegiance. I refused." She looked down at her hands. "I would not sell our people into servitude. I believed we could find our own solution." Seraphina argued that I was sacrificing our people for my pride. She convinced the council that my refusal was a declaration of war on our own future. So she made a deal. She gave the consortium everything they wanted, and they gave her the throne. The cure they provided, it works, but it renders our soil sterile after one harvest. It makes us completely dependent on them for resupply. It is not a cure. It is a leash. The full picture snapped into focus. It wasn't just a coup. It was the systematic enslavement of an entire world. My loyal guard created a diversion for me to escape. They died buying me time. I came here to find a weapon, an old ally of my father's. But the consortium's agents found me first. And now we're running." Jax finished. "Yes." He was silent for a moment, processing everything. The scale of it was immense. A princess, a plague, a traitorous sister, a rapacious corporation. It was a fight that could swallow them whole. "No," he said, his voice firm. She looked up at him, startled. "No, we're done running," he said, turning to face her fully. "Running gets you cornered. It gets you killed. We're going to hit them back." A spark of hope ignited in her violet eyes. "How?" "It is just the two of us against the entire consortium. The consortium has a headquarters in this city, a command spire. It's where they coordinate their off-world operations. It's where your sister will be," he reasoned. "You said she's the politician. She'll want to oversee the capture of her fugitive sister personally. It solidifies her power." Lyra's eyes widened as she understood. "We go after Seraphina. We cut the head off the snake," he confirmed. "It's insane," she breathed. "It's a fortress. Every fortress has a crack," he said, a grim smile touching his lips for the first time. "We just have to find it." The plan was simple and suicidal. They would use the service tunnels to get as close to the consortium spire as possible, then infiltrate it during a shift change. They spent the next day moving, planning, conserving their energy. The grim determination settled over them. They were no longer fugitives. They were fighters. An army of two. They reached the sublevels of the spire under the cover of the district's manufactured night cycle. The security was heavy, but it was all focused on the outside. No one expected an attack from below. Jax found a ventilation shaft that led up into the tower's lower maintenance levels. It was a tight squeeze, but they managed. They emerged into the sterile, humming guts of the building. "From here, we take the service elevators," he whispered, pointing to a schematic he'd memorized from old city plans. "Command and control is on the top floor. Seraphina's throne room, I'd bet." They moved like ghosts through the pristine corridors, a stark contrast to the filth of the tunnels. They took down 2 patrol drones with silenced energy pistols, the machines clattering uselessly to the polished floor. They reached the service elevator undetected. "Ready?" he asked, his hand on the activation panel. Lyra met his gaze, her own eyes blazing with a cold fire. She didn't need to answer. She just nodded, her grip tightening on her submachine gun. The elevator ride was the longest minute of his life. A silent ascent into the heart of the enemy's power. He looked at her. She was no longer the wounded, cornered creature he'd found in the alley. She was a queen, a warrior, and she was magnificent. The elevator doors hissed open onto a scene of controlled chaos. The command deck. Technicians and officers in consortium uniforms moved between holographic displays and control consoles. At the far end of the vast room, on a raised dais, was a throne. And on the throne sat a woman with the same silver hair and aristocratic features as Lyra. Serafina. She was beautiful, but her beauty was cold, brittle. She was watching a large holographic display showing a map of the city, red icons pulsing in the sector where Jax's bunker had been. "Find her," Serafina's voice commanded, sharp and imperious. "I want her found by morning." "We're right here," Lyra said, her voice ringing out with surprising volume. Every head in the room snapped toward the elevator. For a second, there was stunned silence. Then all hell broke loose. Alarms blared. Soldiers shouted and scrambled for their weapons. Jax and Lyra didn't wait. They opened fire. Jax took cover behind a console, laying down suppressing fire, his shots precise and deadly. Lyra moved with breathtaking speed and grace, a whirlwind of destruction. She closed the distance to the nearest soldiers, her weapon spitting controlled bursts, her movements a deadly dance. They fought back to back, an instinctive synergy taking over. He covered her reloads. She protected his flank. They were a perfect, lethal machine. They carved a path through the command deck, leaving a trail of fallen enforcers in their wake. The technicians and officers scrambled for cover, their fight not with guns, but with data. The soldiers were the real threat, and there were too many of them. "Serafina," Lyra roared, her voice cutting through the cacophony of battle. "Face me, coward." Her sister watched from the safety of her throne, her expression a mixture of shock and cold fury. Two elite guards in heavy armor moved to stand in front of her, their massive pulse cannons whining as they powered up. "We can't get through them," Jax yelled over the gunfire. "We have to draw them out." As if on cue, a heavy blast door began to descend behind the throne, sealing off Serafina's escape route, or her private sanctuary. "Kill them," Serafina ordered, her voice laced with venom. "Kill them both." The remaining soldiers pressed their attack, pinning Jax and Lyra behind a bank of servers. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, melting metal and plastic. "I'm going to draw their fire," Lyra said, her jaw set. "When I move, you take out the elite guard." "That's suicide," he shot back. "It's the only way." Before he could argue, she broke cover. She ran, weaving through the consoles, drawing a hail of fire toward her. It was the opening he needed. Jax rose from cover, his pistol steady in his two-handed grip. He took a breath, slowed the world down. One shot, the weak point in the armor, the optical sensor on the helmet. He fired twice. Two clean shots. One elite guard crumpled. The other spun, his massive cannon swinging toward Jax. Jax knew he wouldn't be fast enough to get back into cover. He saw the cannon charge, the air crackling with energy. He saw Lyra, her eyes wide with horror as she realized what was about to happen. Time seemed to stretch. He thought of his empty life before her, the gray, meaningless days. And he thought of her, the color she had brought back into his world, the fire, the purpose. He didn't regret his choice. He moved, not away, but toward Lyra. He threw himself in front of her, his body shielding hers, a last, desperate, protective act. The world dissolved into white-hot agony. The pulse cannon bolt hit him square in the back. His armor flash vaporized. The force of the impact lifted him off his feet and slammed him into Lyra, sending them both crashing to the floor. Darkness swarmed at the edges of his vision. The last thing he heard was her scream, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. Pain, a universe of it. That's all Jax knew. It was a searing, relentless fire that consumed his entire being. He tried to move, but his limbs wouldn't respond. He was floating in a black, agonizing void. Faintly, as if from a great distance, he heard sounds. Shouting. The crackle of energy weapons. A single, chilling scream of terror that was abruptly cut off. Then, silence. A hand touched his face. Cool. Gentle. Jax. Lyra's voice. Thick with tears. He forced his eyes open. The world was a blurry mess. He could make out her face, hovering above him. Her silver hair was matted with grime and something dark. Her eyes were wild with grief and fear. You idiot, she whispered, a tear tracing a clean path through the soot on her cheek. You self-sacrificing human idiot. He tried to smile, but it was more of a grimace. Is she? He managed to rasp, his throat raw. She's gone, Lyra said, her voice flat, dead. It's over. He looked past her. The command deck was a scene of utter devastation. Bodies and wreckage were strewn everywhere. By the throne, the second elite guard lay in a heap, his armor melted and fused. Seraphina was slumped on the steps of the dais, her cold beauty marred by a final expression of disbelief. Lyra had finished it. Alone. Fueled by rage. You're hurt, he coughed, a fresh wave of agony racking his body. I'm fine, she said quickly, her hands pressing against the catastrophic wound on his back. Don't talk. Save your strength. He could feel his life bleeding out onto the cold floor of the command deck. His vision started to tunnel. Guess this is it, he breathed. No, she said, her voice fierce, commanding. I do not permit it. Do you hear me, Jax? I forbid you to die. He felt a strange warmth spread from her hands, seeping into the wound. It wasn't enough to stop the pain, but it held the darkness at bay. The sound of heavy footsteps approached. Jax tensed, what little strength he had left gathering for a final, useless fight. But the figures that appeared were not consortium enforcers. They were tall, clad in ornate, silver armor, their helmets shaped like the heads of predatory birds. They carried ceremonial glaives. Lyra's people, her royal guard. One of them knelt beside her. My queen, the soldier said, his voice filled with reverence. We came as soon as we received your signal. The consortium fleet is in disarray. We have retaken the system. Prepare the med bay on my flagship, Lyra commanded, her voice ringing with an authority Jax had never heard before. Bring the best surgeons. And bring a stasis pod. Now, the guard nodded and relayed the orders. Lyra looked back down at Jax, her expression softening. Hang on, she whispered, her thumb stroking his cheek. Just hang on. He wanted to, but the darkness was too strong. It pulled him under. His last conscious thought was of her face. The face of a queen. His queen. Consciousness returned slowly. First, a dull awareness. Then, the absence of pain. He opened his eyes. He wasn't in the blood-soaked command deck. He was in a room that seemed to be carved from a single piece of pearlescent material. The light was soft, indirect. He was lying on a bed that molded perfectly to his body. He felt whole. He sat up, slowly. There was no stiffness. No lingering ache. He looked down at his hands, then ran them over his torso. No scars. Even the old one on his face was gone. A door slid open with a soft hiss. Lyra entered. She was no longer dressed in rags or borrowed clothes. She wore a flowing gown of deep violet, embroidered with silver thread that seemed to shimmer with its own light. A simple silver circlet rested on her brow. She looked every inch the queen she was. Her eyes lit up when she saw him awake. A radiant, genuine smile transformed her face. You're awake. What, how long? He asked, his voice still a little rough. 3 weeks, she said, walking to his bedside. Your injuries were extensive. Our medical technology is advanced, but it took time to regenerate the damaged tissue. And your spine. He reached back, feeling the smooth, unblemished skin where the plasma bolt had hit. It was as if it had never happened. I thought I was dead. I told you, she said, her smile fading into a more serious expression. I would not permit it. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hand finding his. Her touch was warm and certain. The consortium has withdrawn from our sector entirely. The news of Seraphina's death and the loss of their command spire caused a panic in their corporate structure. Their stock plummeted. They cut their losses and ran. So you won, he said. We won, she corrected him softly. My people are free. The restoration has begun. We are rebuilding. An awkward silence fell between them. The universe had been righted. The adventure was over. He was a loner from a backwater planet. She was the queen of a star system. There was a gulf between them now, one that couldn't be crossed in a dark bunker or a desperate firefight. I should probably be getting back, he said, the words feeling hollow. Back to what? She asked, her grip on his hand tightening. Your concrete box. Your empty life. The words stung because they were true. It's my life, he said, unable to meet her gaze. It doesn't have to be, she said, her voice pleading. Stay, Jax. Stay with me. I don't belong here, Lyra. Look at you. You're a queen. I'm just a guy with a gun. You are the man who saved my life, she said fiercely. The man who stood by me when I had nothing. The man who walked into the heart of the enemy's power for me. The man who took a plasma bolt for me. She stood up and began to pace, the calm, regal facade cracking to reveal the passionate warrior beneath. Do you think any of this, she gestured around the ornate room, matters more than that? Do you think these titles, this throne, mean anything to me without you? He was silent, stunned by the raw emotion in her voice. She stopped in front of him, her hands on her hips. My council is traditional. They are grateful to you, but they see you as an outsider, a human. They say I need to make a political alliance, to marry a prince from a neighboring system to secure our borders. His heart sank. Of course. Politics. It was always politics. I see, he said, his voice flat. No, she said, shaking her head. You don't. I am holding my coronation ceremony this evening. I will formally accept the crown and address my people for the first time as their undisputed ruler. Congratulations, he said, the word tasting like poison. I am telling you this, Jax, she said, her violet eyes boring into his. Because I want you to be there. I want you to stand with me. As what? Your pet human. The hired help. She flinched as if he had struck her. As my equal. The ceremony was held in a vast hall that seemed to be open to the stars themselves. Thousands of her people were gathered, their silver and violet attire a stark contrast to Jax's simple black fatigues. He stood in the shadows at the side of the hall, feeling profoundly out of place. Guards gave him suspicious looks. Courtiers whispered behind their hands as he passed. Lyra stood on a high dais, a magnificent, ancient crown held by a high priestess before her. She was resplendent, a figure of myth and power. She went through the ancient rituals, her voice clear and strong as she took her oaths. Finally, the crown was placed upon her head. The crowd erupted in a deafening roar. Long live Queen Lyra. She let the cheer wash over her, then raised a hand for silence. My people, she began, her voice magically amplified throughout the hall. We have endured a time of darkness, of betrayal and subjugation. But we are free. We have taken back our destiny. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the crowd until her eyes found his. She locked onto him, and for a moment, it felt like they were the only two people in the universe. But I did not do this alone, she continued, her voice ringing with conviction. When I was hunted, wounded, and alone, one man stood for me. A human, an outsider. He did not seek power or reward. He sought only to protect the helpless and defy the corrupt. A murmur went through the crowd. All eyes turned to find the human she spoke of. They found Jax, standing awkwardly in the shadows. He fought by my side. He bled for our cause. He shielded me with his own body, sacrificing himself so that I, and our people, might live. She beckoned to him. Jax, come. Every eye was on him. He felt 1,000 years of tradition and xenophobia pressing down on him. He hesitated. Lyra's expression was unwavering. It was a plea, a command, a promise. He took a breath and walked out of the shadows, up the steps of the dais, to stand beside her. The crowd was silent, their shock palpable. My council advises me to seek an alliance through marriage, Lyra announced, her voice booming. They say I need a king to stand beside me, a royal of equal standing. She turned to face Jax, taking both of his hands in hers. I have no need of a king. She looked back out at her people, her eyes blazing. But I will have my shield. I will have my heart. I choose him, not as a consort to be hidden away, but as my partner, my equal. He has no title. He has no lineage recognized by our laws. But he has my loyalty. He has my love. And he has my throne, to share with me, for all of his days. The hall was utterly silent. The council of elders looked horrified. Then, Lyra did something that shattered 1,000 years of protocol. She leaned in and kissed him. A deep, passionate kiss, right there, in front of her entire world. It was not a kiss of desperation in a dark bunker. It was a declaration. a sealing of a bond, a challenge to anyone who would dare question her choice. When she pulled back, a single soldier from the royal guard, the one who had found them in the command spire, raised his glaive and slammed its butt on the floor. A resounding boom. Then another soldier followed. And another. Soon, the entire hall was filled with the thunderous rhythm of hundreds of royal guards banging their weapons in a salute of ultimate respect. A warrior's approval. The people, seeing the guards' acceptance, began to cheer. Tentatively at first, then with growing enthusiasm. They were cheering for him. For them. Lyra squeezed his hand, a triumphant smile on her face. Later that night, they stood on a balcony overlooking the crystalline city. The twin suns were setting, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. Jax was still trying to process the sheer audacity of what she had done. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "You could have just kept me here. Secretly." "I don't do secrets," she said, leaning against him, her head on his shoulder. "And I don't hide what is mine." "I'm not yours, Lyra," he said, but there was no heat in it. "No," she said, tilting her head up to look at him. "And am I yours?" He looked down into her glowing violet eyes, the eyes of the woman who had dragged him back into the light. The woman who had chosen him over tradition, politics, and the expectations of her entire race. "Yeah," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he was still learning to name. "You are." "Then we belong to each other," she said simply, as if it were the most obvious truth in the universe. A new status quo. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. He was no longer a loner. No longer a ghost hiding in the alleys of a forgotten world. He was the shield of a queen, her partner, her equal. He looked out at the alien sky, at the future stretching before them. It would be hard. There would be challenges, political enemies, assassins, old traditions that would fight their new reality. But for the first time in a very long time, he wasn't afraid. He had a purpose. He had a home. He had her. And together, they were ready for the next fight.